So welcome to the last lecture of Business Technology and Innovation. So this week we'll be devoting a bit of attention to the exam, but there's one more topic I want to discuss, which is implementation of innovation and information technology. So we're going to do that first, then I'll tell something about the database assignment, about what the correct solution would be, and then I'll tell something about the exam shortly. So if you have any questions about the exam or database assignment, save them for a bit later, because we're first going to do the last topic. So welcome everyone, and let's get started. So yeah, the reason is, so well, of course it's kind of logical that you save implementation for a later lecture, and the reason for discussing it in the first place is that implementation is very important. If you consider the last, if you consider the complete course, the whole course has been about, okay, you have an idea for an innovation or something else. What are the organizational consequences? So what will happen if you implement the innovation or technology in the organization? So because it has a lot of consequences for the people who work there, for the structure, the culture, etc. And dealing with that, that is implementation. So I want to tell you a bit about implementation, and I want to discuss 4 different strategies that you can use to implement technology and innovations in an organization. So implementation of innovation is difficult because if you remember this slide from the first and second lecture, innovation is oftentimes new, of course, because it's innovation. And not all innovations are completely new, of course, but innovation brings about some change. And that creates a tension between the innovation and the organization, and also between the technology and an organization, because an organization wants to remain stable, wants to keep doing what it's doing. So every time you implement some change, there's going to be some friction and some tension in the organization. You have to train structures, people don't want to change. And managing that tension, that is implementation. And implementation is a big issue. Basically every major consultancy company out there works or is in the job because of implementation. They help organizations change, they help implement changes in structure, they implement new technologies, new software, etc. Because usually organizations cannot do it alone, because it's very difficult. Because you have to take into account basically every aspect of the organization in order to implement something. Well, I hope this is all quite clear. So, for example, we talked about people and innovation and people and technology in lecture number 7, that we discussed that people need a certain motivation to get to work, and that if you implement a new technology in an organization, their motivation may change. So they may become more autonomous or less autonomous because the system takes over part of their work. It may lead them to experience their work better, to have the idea that they actually have a job that's meaningful, and those are only that's only one aspect of the people aspect of implementing something in an organization. But when you implement something, you have to take into account everything: culture, structure, strategy, technology, innovation, etc. Well, of course, like I said, you already have some experience with that because you wrote a business plan, and you and we discussed that in the lectures. But there are certain tactics on how to implement technology or how to implement innovation in an organization. So what is implementation? Well, implementation basically means that you formulate a strategy and formulate a project surrounding the strategy with the aim of introducing an innovation or information system or technology to an organization, specifically to the people in our organization who have to use that technology. And you do that with the aim of removing resistance and stimulating optimal use. Because you can have an idea which is great, but if people are not willing to use it, and if people are resistant in using it, then your innovation or your technology will fail. And that's difficult, because people are generally not really inclined to change. People are very hesitant to switch to a new technology. Well, sometimes, unless it's a technology that really fits what they're already used to. So you're not really hesitant to switch to a new laptop or to a new iPhone. But if I would say, if you switch from iPhone to Samsung or the other way around, depending on what you use, then you would be very resistant to change. It works the same way in an organization. People have been using certain software, certain technologies, in a certain way with certain procedures for a long time. If you suddenly implement something in an organization, people are not likely to change and to accept that as is. You have to convince people that's a good idea. So you have to fit the technology into the innovation. You have to fit the innovation into the organization. You have to familiarize users with the technology. So you have to train them. You have to give them information. You have to communicate with them about the technology. And you have to identify resistance and stimulate use. So you have to facilitate that people are willing to use it. And that happens more often than you think. So sometimes people just refuse to use the technology, or they, or as a group, they object to using a new technology. So especially when a new technology or new innovation means that people have to work in a different way, or maybe even some people in an organization need to leave. So especially then, people are not willing to use a new technology in an organization. So you have to try to convince people in an organization to use the innovation, to use the technology, and remove barriers of resistance. So basically what this means is that innovation is as much a technology, is as much a technology thing as an organizational thing. And basically implementing something in an organization is more an organizational thing than simple technology. So what you have to do, you have to plan that well. So, and especially in larger projects, so you have project management methods, such as Prince2 and other more recent agile methods, which are methods aimed at implementing change in an organization. So to formulate the strategy of, formulate a project definition, and to formulate the exact steps and the exact plan you have to take in order to implement something in an organization. So this is also what happens often when you just when you have a restructuring of your organization. So in organizational change, people also do that. So they also define an implementation strategy for how are we going to deal with the change in your organization, and how are we going to get people with us and not against us. So you basically formulate an implementation strategy and project definition, and then you formulate a plan of how you're going to convince the people of using technology. And as I said, it is really challenging, because I'm pretty sure that now half of you will think, okay, what's the problem exactly? So if I have a cool technology, if I can clearly show that the innovation I have will make the organization better, will increase sales, will make the organization more efficient, why should implementation then be a challenge? No, I'm not going to complain if I get a new iPhone. And I understand, but that's not how people function in general in organizations. If you have experience in working in organizations, if you have experience in working with people, especially people who are a bit older, and have been working in an organization for a bit longer, they really are resistant to change. And even if objectively, or at least from your perspective, an innovation is a good idea, there are certainly some people who think it's a bad idea. And you have that with, well, in general, people are more stupid and more resistant to change than you think. Think about the anti-vaxxers, for example. And in a less extreme form, you also encounter that in organizations. Thanks. But it's not only that. So it's not only because of the people, it's also because of the expectations that are different. So for example, especially innovations in information technology are usually combined with organizational change and then implemented in an organization. So, and that usually means that people will have to change position or will have to be fired. And then it's logical that an implementation doesn't work. So because you introduce a new technology, but together with that, you introduce a lot of other change. So it's not only because of the people, it's also because of the people planning it. And it's often difficult, it's often not as simple as a new system. So think of your business plans and your ideas, that often involves a different way of working. So it's sometimes innovations are technologically difficult. They're introduced in a firm that has been working with other software, other hardware, other ways of working, other procedures, etc. Moreover, I think Bjorn said that in his guest lecture that he has now been working on the same project for over a year, and it's a huge implementation of ERP software. Within that year, a lot of things change. The external conditions change, the turnover change. Maybe there's a new manager or a new CEO who thinks that things should be done differently. So external conditions are likely to change during the project. Well, this all becomes more and more difficult if you implement something across organizations or even across different departments of an organization. And finally, managers often have magic bullet expectations. They often think, so, okay, once we implement this, then everything will work out. And I think you know that I also experience that. I always think, okay, once I'm done with this course, then I'm finally gonna have some rest. Okay, and then once I have done this, then I'm finally gonna get organized. So everyone has magic bullet expectations. So once this external condition is met, everything will be fine, which never happens. So there are often unrealistically positive expectations of what an innovation will achieve. Well, consider we've been using personal computers for like 30 years now, and it's not that we have become hugely efficient in using them. So the magic bullet expectations that we had in the 1980s and 90s, that in the 2020s everyone will be working majorly efficient because of our computers, has not become true. So often there are magic bullet expectations. Well, okay, implementation is difficult, fine. What are we going to do about it? Well, basically, there are 4 different strategies that you can employ to implement an innovation or technology, or basically implement everything what you want in an organization. These implementation strategies on screen, they are not unique to innovations or technology. They are just general implementation strategies. So they are strategies that you can use depending on your organization, depending on your project, to convince people to adopt change. And there are 4 different strategies. So it's life cycle, emergent, participative, and political. And all of them are like general approaches, strategies in order to accomplish something. And which one is best really depends on the type of organization, on the type of innovation, on the people in an organization, etc. So let's start with the first one. Well, life cycle strategy basically means that you try to be as rational as possible when implementing a technology. So this means that you implement something through thorough planning with clear objectives and milestones, and generally a bit top-down. So this is a really rational strategy. And this one only works when you have people in an organization who are educated, who understand the technology and who understand the change that is needed in an organization, and who are basically already a bit willing to accept the change. And the basic philosophy behind this implementation strategy is that people act rationally and make their decisions on the basis of rational considerations, taking their own interests into account. So basically this means that you thoroughly plan a project where you have milestones and stages, you inform people, and then people, if you just inform them well, people will be able to make their own decisions about the implementations, come to the conclusion that's a good idea, and then accept the change. So this works well in organizations which are more or less more highly educated people or more professional people work with a high degree of knowledge of the organization, what they're doing in the organization, and of the technologies they work with in the organization. And this is also often the implementation strategy for very large projects, which costs hundreds of millions of euros, which need a very thorough planning. So what do you do to convince people to use the technology in this case? Well, first of all, you are realistic. So you're honest, realistic. You explain to them, okay, why do we need this innovation or technology? What is the value of the technology? What will the changes be in the organization? And why are the changes needed in the organization? So you are realistic. But of course optimistic, because else you wouldn't do the implementation. With that, it means that you educate and train people. So you educate them and you train them in order to explain to them why the change is needed, and you train them in the use of the system. You monitor progress, you get feedback throughout, depending on the planning and the stages where you're in. And well, of course, you select suitable personnel and deploy them. So you select experts who deploy the innovation or technology in the organization. So this is one implementation strategy. And this is the most rational one. But this one, of course, doesn't always work. I'll tell you why later. So this is the second one. So this is the emergent strategy, and this is partly similar to the life cycle strategy, only it's more flexible. So this is what we call agile now, or Scrum when you program. So the emergent strategy basically means that you consider people to be flexible, you consider people to value change, you consider people to work with the technology, and you consider people to be able to handle a changing and flexible environment. So if you implement something via this strategy, you basically actively involve the users of the future users in the development process. Which basically means that if you implement a new technology, for example, a new customer relationship management system in an organization using this implementation strategy, you, at the beginning of the project, invite the users to join the project. In every stage, you allow users to work with the project. You implement the project or the system as soon as possible, and then have people work with it, have people give feedback and improve the system, etc. So this is that implementation strategy. But of course, this is only to work if people are willing to use the system, if people are knowledgeable enough to use the system and to give feedback, and if people value change in the organization. So if they resist the innovation, this strategy will not work. So in order to do this, you need active communication between developers and users. So you need to really integrate and invite your users to be part of the implementation process. And people who implement the implementation, they need to actively involve the user. So a high degree of communication between developers and users, and active involvement in the design process, such as rapid prototyping, agile, Scrum, basically everything that's popular now in developing applications is part of an emergent strategy, belongs to the emergent strategy. And finally, this means that you have to educate people in using a new system, but especially via on-the-job training. So during the implementation process. So like I said, this strategy is often used in teams of programmers, or in teams that are in organizations that are highly knowledgeable, work with a specific technology, and have the knowledge to implement new technology themselves and to know why it's needed. Good question. Yeah, it's called emergent, not because the strategy, well, partly, it's called emergent because the way of implementation, so how you go about the project, changes during the implementation. So you have an idea for a new customer relationship management system, you involve the users, you implement the first version of the system, you get feedback, then you need to adapt the system, maybe adapt the implementation. So because it's a kind of a cycle of continuous improvement, we call it emergent. And the other one is called life cycle, because that basically means that you plan everything at the beginning and then implement it according to certain stages, like the life cycle. Okay, the third one is the participative implementation strategy. And this one is rather different from the first two. So this is an implementation strategy in which you are not so much focused on explaining to people why it is useful, or involving people in the implementation. Well, you involve them in an implementation process, but not really involve them into the ins and outs of the technology. This is a strategy in which you try to convince people using social tactics. That's why it's called participative. So this is a strategy in which you create a social climate that is positive towards implementation. So it basically means that you try to get a social situation in which people like you and therefore like the change and the implementation. So this only works if well, precondition, people are primarily geared towards satisfying social needs in the organization. And that basically means this only works when people can get along and where there is a high degree of satisfaction and commitment and identification in and with the organization. And the tactics you employ here are also different. So what you do here is you facilitate and promote participation. Well, that's somewhat different, but you don't facilitate and promote participation because you expect people to actually help implementation, but you facilitate and promote participation because you do it to take away resistance. You do it because people will like you, will like the project, and are then willing to work with it. So you involve people in the implementation process because you want to convince them to use the system. And you don't really want feedback. Which also means that you have to give people the opportunity to get acquainted with the system. You have to activate the learning process so that people will convince each other of using a system. And finally, you have to employ strategies to influence attitudes and create ownership. And that basically means you have to identify the people in the organization who are most influential, and you have to convince them first that change is useful. So this basically means that you find the popular people in an organization, the influencers, and convince them that the change is needed. So you can reward them, you can train them, and then they will convince other people in an organization. So this kind of strategy will work in a project where people are somewhat knowledgeable, but this is needed when people are not really knowledgeable of the change and of the technology that's implemented. Because the first two strategies really require people to know what the change is about. So the first two strategies require people who are at least somewhat of an expert in the new system or the new innovation. So this strategy doesn't, well, of course, always a bit, so they need to be somewhat knowledgeable, but they don't really need to be experts in the on the innovation or on the technology that's implemented, because you convince them by using social tactics, not by explaining the workings of the technology. So you convince them by, by organizing a Christmas party, buying them drinks, identifying key people in the organization and convincing them of the need for change, etc. So that's participative. Yeah, this implementation is also pre-planned. So actually only the emergent one is not pre-planned. So you usually think of, when you are part of the project group who is tasked with implementing change in the organization, implementing new technology, you think about the best way of convincing people. So you plan. So in this case, you would say, okay, the system is just too complicated to do it in an emergent fashion. So we have a huge project and we need to implement it in stages. The end users of the technology we are going to implement are also somewhat knowledgeable, and they have to use the new system, but it would go too far to go into every detail about why we need to change. That's why we depend on the identification and the commitment that people have with the organization to convince them. So you have to pre-plan the strategy. Well, well, that's a very good question. Are the disadvantages? Well, you hope to take away resistance by identifying influencers and by identifying key people and explaining to them what the disadvantages are of the implementation, in the hope that they will convince the rest of the organization. But it's a very good point. It's in this strategy, it usually helps to be somewhat honest if there are true disadvantages, but not really. But it also depends on the extent to which you can convince people about of the use of your organization. So that's why it's important upfront to think about, okay, what are the disadvantages of the implementation? Does it have huge disadvantages? So if, for example, half of the people in our organization will be laid off because of the implementation, then this strategy won't work, because then your commitment to the organization is gone anyway. So then it's better to use a different strategy. But if the disadvantages are relatively minor, then you can convince people that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So, but it's a very good point. So if your implementation requires a lot of organizational change with a lot of disadvantages for the people in the organization, then you cannot rely on a positive climate in the organization. Then you have to employ other tactics. So then life cycle will probably be an option, and the political approach. So this is the last one, and this is basically the one in which you employ every political strategy that you can in order to convince people to accept an organizational change. So political, in which you implement something through authority and reward and punishment. I don't know what you mean by this one. Is that political or participative? Yeah, political. Yeah, so the basic philosophy here is that people can only be convinced by reward and punishment. So rewarding them for using a system, punishing them for not. So indeed, it's more a power and really a power and political focus. Yeah. And this, if you look at the bottom of the slide, sometimes you just have projects that need to be done. So sometimes you just have to, lay off half of your personnel. Sometimes you need a completely new technology because else you will go out of business. Sometimes you know that people will be very resistant in accepting the change in an organization. So you need to implement a technology like that. Yeah, I'll give an example in a moment. So in this case, you just need to do it, and then you can employ political tactics. But you have to be careful, of course, because this will mess up your commitment to the organization if you do this too much. This is also the reason that oftentimes organizations hire external consultants to do and to manage the implementations, because then the director, the CEO of the organization can say, well, I don't want to fire those people. The consultants say we have to fire those people. So oftentimes external consultants are hired to play the blame game. So you can blame the external consultants, so you have less fuss and less negative feedback in the organization itself. Yes, that's really deceiving your employees, but yeah, it's not that I endorse this strategy, I just know it exists. Yeah, but not that kind of consultant. No, I did internet, it was internet consultancy advising organizations on their internet strategy, which was not this one, not a consultant like this. So it's not always the case, of course. There are, for example, strategy consultants. They are also hired, in order just to help organizations. Yeah, exactly. So they're hired to help organizations manage change, and political can be one part of the strategy, but strategy consultants are generally hired. Okay, we want a change in your organization. We see that our business is declining. Please help us. But sometimes they're also hired in order to facilitate change. And it's not always fair, but like I said in a lecture on organizations, the main goal of an organization is to keep existing. And if organizations can do that while their employees benefit, that would be perfect, but that's not always an option. So sometimes organizations need to change. So organizations need change which is detrimental to some or a lot of the employees in the organization, and then they have to make tough choices, and then this could be a strategy. So it's not a strategy that I would use, but that's probably also the reason that I'm not a CEO. So there are also less bad examples of this. So let me give you let me first finish this slide and then give you an example of this strategy. So in this case, you implement innovations or information technologies or systems by having someone who has the authority, so as an external consultant or a dedicated project manager who has the authority and resources to implement the change. You identify people who are willing to change, so you identify influencers, but you also can identify people who are resistant to change, and then you can fire them, or you can train them in using the system, or you can give them a financial reward if they are willing to use the system. So you can use all these strategies to convince them that the change is needed. That's what reorganization of related reward systems means. That basically means that you give an economic reward or punishment, or financial reward or punishment for people who do certain things, or people who are willing to change versus people who are not willing to change. Of course, you can play political games here, manipulation, identifying, encountering opposition, etc. And of course, like I said, hiring consultants. So now the example in that you can use this strategy in a wider implementation strategy, which is actually, I think, an ethical way of using this strategy. So my ex-girlfriend, she used to work for an anti-smoking organization. It was called Stivora, was now part of RIVM. So she worked for a smoking cessation organization, and her job was to implement a new platform on which people could come together to try to quit smoking. So it's as part of a really huge project in which an app was developed. They developed an online community. They had agreements with with physicians and psychologists that people could visit when they wanted to stop smoking. And she was tasked with that project, and one of the parts, like I said, of that project was an online community in which people who wanted to quit smoking could chat and could share their strategies for quitting smoking, and could give each other a heads up on how they were doing, and could motivate each other. And that really worked quite well. So usually, so in general, if you want people to exert healthy behavior, those social strategies, so getting people together and having them talk with each other about healthy behavior, is a very good strategy. So the community really worked. And it was a website with a forum, with games, with tips, etc., tips and tricks. And quite a few people were active, but there was one person who was active on that community who was really negative the entire time. So he or she, I don't know, was continuously whining for, okay, this feature is not working. why is this not implemented yet? Is our tax money is wasted on this project? You know, just a general troll. But he was doing that, or she. I assume it's a he because it's a negative troll, and because it's a troll, but might as well be a she. So that person was continuously hammering down in the community, and he or she was threatening to take the entire community down because other people were starting to see it and were starting to join that person. So they also started saying, yeah, he's right, but this is a feature that we need. So the community really ran the risk of going downhill, of resulting in kind of a negative, whining community. So when I actually was responsible for that community, and she thought, well, okay, what can I do? So you cannot ban that person. Of course, you can kick that person off the community, but first of all, they can make another account. And second of all, if you ban a person, then other people would notice and would say, well, okay, probably they don't appreciate dissent here. They don't appreciate a critical opinion. So she just couldn't simply ban and kick that person off the community. So what she did, so she co-opted that person. So she used a very deceitful political strategy. So she said to that person, she said I see that you are very involved in this community. I see that you give a lot of feedback on how we can improve this community. So I want to invite you to become a member of our project team. So I want to invite you to become part of the team that develops this community and to be actively involved with us in further developing this community. And that really worked perfect because she never heard of that person again. He left the community and didn't return. Because she knew, of course, up front, that this was not a person who was actually willing to work and who was actually willing to improve the community. It was just a troll. So by making it public, so by posting on the website, okay, I want to involve you, I want your feedback for improvement, she put him or her in a very bad position because now that person couldn't complain anymore about the website because he or she was invited to participate. So the only thing that person could do was either join, which was not the goal of that person because it was just a troll, or leave forever. And that worked. So the last thing worked. So that person left the community. Other people in the community got the impression that it was a really good community because it was made public that she wanted the person to be involved in the community. So I think it was a really good use of the political strategy of identifying opposition and countering it with a positive message, which was not positive at all. Yeah, it's just manipulation. So that's, I think, really a good example of a political strategy, which was bad for that person, but I think overall good for the community and organization as a whole. So it was a bit deceitful, but I think it was within the ethical boundaries of the organization. But this is clearly an example of a political strategy of implementation. So those are the 4 ones. I always think the political one is the most fun, but of course the other ones are the ones you would try, who would probably work better, and who you would actually want in your organization. So political, I think, is only a last resort. So if you need to do 2 projects because external circumstances demand, or if you really have persons in your organization who are not knowledgeable at all about the reasons for change. If that's the case, then this one may be okay. If not, then another strategy should be employed. So to conclude, it really depends on a lot of factors which implementation strategy is best. If you have a very centralized structure, then political and life cycle will be better. I'm sorry, it says here planning and flexible, because until a year ago, these strategies were called differently, and I forgot to update the slide. So it's planning is life cycle and flexible is emergent, but I will change that on the slides. So if your organization is very centralized, then a life cycle strategy or political strategy may work best. If your organization is decentralized, then it's probably participant of emergent that works best. Well, if the users are motivated or resisting, if your culture is formal and informal, if the innovation is really a turnaround versus is it really a minor improvement, that all determines which implementation strategy is best. So in general, it really needs to fit every other aspect of the organization. And I think I already said this. Yeah, I will change it on the slide and then upload a new version. I'm sorry. Okay, if there are other questions, I will see them. So shall we turn to the exam? No. Let me first show you something about the database assignment and the business plan. So you probably have noticed already that the grades for the business plan are in. So we were done with grading last Friday. If you have any questions about them, please email me. And well, let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, the lecture about Bjorn is also exam material, although I have already handed in the exams. And I think I have there of course is a question about an ERP system in the exam, but it's a kind of a combination between the lecture by Bjorn and the lecture we had about ERP systems, lecture number 8, I think. So I would just browse through Bjorn's lecture, but don't study every aspect of his presentation. Yeah, it was more a practical example. To be honest, if I browsed through the slides, it was very difficult to come up with a with a very good with a question which very good question. So I could ask detailed multiple choice questions, but that I think would not really be fair. You don't need to know what Scrum and Agile is in detail. No. Scrum and Agile is just an emergent way of implementation. And that's enough. Let's see, let me go through another screen. Oh. You can find on Canvas now and the model answers for the database assignment. So this is available as PDF on Canvas, so you can check what the most simple but correct solution would be. And in general, I was pretty satisfied with the database assignment and the solutions you gave. Some people had a really basic solution, where basically similarly as is given here or here. And other people had a more worked out solution in which they said, okay, we're going to connect the programs table to the genre table, which is basically also a man-to-man relationship. We're going to have a table with actor information, which you connect to the program table, etc. To which I say, well done, compliments, because that's exactly how a database would really look like in reality, and that's also how what Netflix database looks like. And there were a few. Yeah, there was one trick question in the database assignment. And that was this one. Where was it? So here the company says we basically want information from the customer relationship management system, and we want that information about the customer in the video on demand system. So that basically means that they wanted to have information imported from the customer relationship management system entered into this customer table. And that's what I did here because that's what the company asked. But actually, this would be a very bad solution because this would lead to redundant data because now you store information about the customer twice. So you have it once in your customer relationship management system and you have it once in the VOD system in the customers table. So if you so now what happens if a customer changes his or her subscription, or if he moves, then you have to change it in 2 locations. So that's a really bad idea. So you have to, so what many people did, they said, well, we're not going to do this. We are just going to place the customer ID from this customers table here and put that into the table in the customer relationship management system. And that way they are connected. And that's the better solution, because then you don't have redundant data because you just have a connection between the 2 tables. So that's actually a better solution than is depicted here. Finally, I saw that many people also had something like monthly bill or average rating, etc. But those things are not really needed here. So for example, if I would want to know the average rating for a program, I could just take from this table, take all the ratings with a specific program ID belonging to the program that we're interested in, and just take the average of all those ratings. And that would be the average rating. So there's no need to store that in the database somewhere. I can just calculate it from the data that's in there. Similarly, the monthly fee, I can just take a customer ID. I can just take every program a customer ordered in the last month because I have daytime ordered. And then I can take the paid fee. I can sum all of that, and that would be the monthly bill. So I can also calculate that from the data in the database. So that also means that you need to have paid fee here. There's also a program fee here because that's because program fee can change. So you can have so an older movie can have a lower fee. But you need to store a paid fee in the order table. And that's what many people did incorrectly. Also, most of the people did it correctly, but still many people did it incorrectly. And that's that it's stored it in the wrong location. So here I have a short example with data. So we have these are the same tables, but I did not implement. Yes, the document with the model answers is available on Canvas. Yes, in the module for lecture 13. Thank you, Jet. Thanks. And there will be questions in the exam about the database. Yes, there are no open questions, but in the exam and in the re-exam there are, I think, 2 multiple choice questions, maybe 3, 2 or 3, in the exam about databases. Yes. So here I recreated the tables, but then as a normal table view, and but not with every field because that would take it too far. So here I have the customers table with the customer ID, and there are only 2 customers here, Alex and Jan. I have added the date that they were added to the date I'm going to say something about the exam in a moment. So date edit. There's a program table with only 2 movies, movie 1, movie 2 with this ID. And the fee for movie 1 is €5 and the fee for movie 2 is €10. And then I have the order table in between. And you see that customer 1 has ordered program 1, customer 1 has ordered program 2, customer 2 has ordered program 1 and 2. So both customers have ordered both movies. I will answer the questions about the exams, etc. later in a moment. So you can see here, so if I am customer number 1, I watch movie number 1 and I think the movie is pretty good, so I give it a 9. I paid €5 for it and well, I did not pass the program, so this one is, yeah. Sorry. Did not pass. Oh, annoying. So I also watched movie number 2. I don't think it was that good, and I paid €10 for it. And similarly, so let's say I pause. This movie at 0:65 at 65 minutes. So what many people did, so they included these things in other tables. So for example, there were many people who did the past here. But if I would include the time passed for a program in the programs table, so suppose what happens. So Alex, I order movie number 1 and I pause it at 56 minutes. And then I store it here. So what would happen if customer number 2 then pauses the movie? Where would you store that? Well, you cannot overwrite this one because I just paused the movie. But so there's no way to solve this. And this would also mean that if you store pause here, that the movie would, so everyone who has currently ordered that movie is suddenly paused at 56 minutes. So the only way to include a pause in a movie, which is unique for a movie and for the customer, is to include it here, because now you can see customer number 1 has paused program number 1 at 56 minutes. And I can include here customer number 2 has paused program number 1 at, I don't know, 50 minutes. So that's what some people did incorrectly. And the same with rating and fee. These are all things that are unique to both program and customers. So as a final example, the fee. So for example, movie number 1 is €5. So I am the first one who watches this movie and I pay €5. But what the company can do, they can say, okay, we're gonna decrease the fee for that program to 4. And now I still have paid €5 because that's what I paid when I ordered. But when customer number 2 orders that movie, he only pays €4 because that's the current fee. And now you've taken into account changing fees in the software. And this basically is exactly how no, but not exactly, but this is basically how Netflix also works. So they have a huge table with every program everyone has watched, in which you give your rating, in which you pause it, and they have a huge program table, and let me switch to the other one. They have worked out the genres and the descriptions, etc., to a bigger extent. And they can combine everything together, so they can say, this customer likes this movie, that movie is this genre, and they would also, then they would probably also like movies from that genre as well. Now, why would you want to know why people pause a movie? What is that information used for? Well, you as an organization don't want to know when you pause a movie, but the system needs to know when a movie is paused. When you watch Netflix and you pause a program, if you then quit Netflix, or you switch from your television to your computer, then Netflix still has remembered where you are in that program. So you can continue watching from the moment that you paused or the moment that you quit watching. So that information on when you paused needs to be stored somewhere. It's not stored in your television, because when you go on your, well, that's not possible anyways, but also because you then continue watching on your computer, they still know when you pause the program. So it needs to be stored somewhere in a database. It needs to be stored somewhere, and this would be a good location for it. So it's not used for strategic and for management information. So the pause is not used to make decisions about which movies customers want to watch. It's purely there for a practical purpose. Is that clear, Emma? Yeah, well, I can only commend you for thinking strategically instead of practically, because that's hopefully what you are going to do once you graduate and start your job. So that's it. So for the rest, in the so thank you for adding that. So in the modules for lecture 13, you can find a link to the model answers, so you can review it. So okay, finally, let's turn to the exam. And there were already a few questions. Yeah, Rochelle, I'm getting to how many questions there will be in a moment. Yeah, questions about login and codes for the practice exam. I don't have codes for the practice exam. It's somewhere on the FAQ for the practice exam, how you acquire that code. So I don't know if well, let me check where that code is, and if you need one in the first place, and I will add that to the information I posted on Canvas. But I don't have any code for the practice exam. But I'll figure it out and let you know. Okay, exam information. So, well, learning goals, etc. But basically, just let me say, yeah, good question. Yes, you're allowed to eat something that won't register. And like I explained on the discussion forum, the proctoring is not someone who is watching. It's an algorithm that really just kind of tracks an indication of fraud over time. So you have a figure like this, and once it hits a certain threshold, or once it becomes bigger than this, then it may be an indication of fraud. And then someone can watch it. But it's not when you eat something or when you look away or whatever. It's really if someone enters the room, or if when you show the laptop in front, you see all kind of papers on your desk. That would be indications, but not just eating and looking away. Okay, questions about proctoring. The exam is in Canvas and not via test vision. Can we see ourselves on the webcam during the exam? I don't know. Maybe someone else can answer that. So maybe someone else who had a proctored exam before. Yes, you can. Oh, terrible. Okay, thanks, Houter. How do we enter the exam? Like, where do we have to go to get in? Well, you can just go to Canvas and do the assignments, and there's an assignment which is the exam, and there you make the exam, and then you automatically be in a proctored environment. So it's easier than it looks. Until when can you sign up for the exam? I don't know, because that's central administration, and so that's Osiris, and I have no say over Osiris, and I cannot even look into Osiris until when the sign up deadline is. So I would say, if you haven't signed up already, sign up for the exam immediately, because you need to be so you need to sign up for the exam in order to take part in the exam, else Proctorio won't work. Thanks everyone. So when you enter the assignment on Canvas, you automatically go to Proctorio. Yes, I think so, but I cannot use Proctorio myself because I cannot do the assignment and the exam. So I don't know for sure. If everything works well, you just click on the assignment and then you will automatically go to Proctorio. But like someone said above, you need to use Chrome, and you need to have the Proctorio plugin installed beforehand, of course. So check all the steps on the FAQ and on the discussion board here, so to make sure you have Chrome, you have the plugin installed, and do the checks so that everything will work. So like I said before, last year with communication theory, I think about 90 people or so took the exam via Proctorio, and there were no issues at all. Okay, other questions, let me know. Then in the meantime, I'm going to say just one short thing about the course. So I've already said this like 80 times or so. So the whole premise of the course is that technological innovation does not occur in a vacuum, and several forces play a role in the innovation process, which basically means that if you have an idea for an innovation or an idea for a new technology, you have to take into account everything in the organization. And really the premise of the course is that it's easy to think of a new product, a new innovation, but it's more difficult to try to implement that in an organization, to take into account the strategy, the structure, the culture, and all the changes required in order to make the innovation a success. And if you look at all the lectures we had, it's basically all about innovation. It's about relation between innovation and parts of the organization. It's about how an innovation affects the information systems, the databases in an organization, etc. And many open questions on the exam also will be about, okay, you have innovation X, explain how this will change organization Y with these characteristics. So that's really the core of this course. Okay, how will the exam work? It will be two and a half hours, 150 minutes. It's a closed book exam. It's online proctored. Like I said, don't worry about proctoring. We won't watch and see Canvas for more information. The success rate of the exam is 80% overall. I think it will be a bit higher even if I consider last year. So it basically means that about 70% or so will pass the exam, 60 to 70% at first try, and another 60 to 70% in the reset, which makes it's somewhere between 80 and 90%. I think more close to 90% who pass the exam. If you prepare well, of course. Now, questions and answers has to be in English. If you have dyslexia, you get 3 hours instead of 2.5. Yeah, you get 30 minutes extension, which also will be programmed automatically into the Canvas exam. Yeah. No, I am not going to check English spelling and grammar. So if I would, everyone would get a 1. No, I don't pay attention to it at all. Juliette, great, thank you very much. Yeah, so that's the answer to the question about the access code. Great, thanks. Yeah, duration is 2.5 hours. No clue why it says 2 here. It's 2.5. Yeah. So it covers all lectures and corresponding literature. So the lectures, lecture slides, and literature. But I have many people already asked that question. I base my exam on the lectures and the lecture slides. So the literature is there to support. So if you don't understand, if you don't understand a part based on the slides, then refer to the literature. And what I always did when I prepared exams was to really study the slides and the lectures, and then read through the literature as an extra backup. And I think that's enough to prepare for the exam. So I won't ask detailed questions about the literature which are not in the lectures. Also, there are many hidden slides in the lectures on the PowerPoint slides. Of course, those hidden slides are not part of the exam literature because I didn't discuss that in the lectures. Okay, here it is. 2 parts. There are 25 multiple choice questions. I'll come to that in a moment. There are 25 multiple choice questions which give you 50 credits. And then there are 4 open questions, each consisting of a number of sub-questions, which will also give you 50 credits. And your final grade will be the number of credits you receive divided by 10, and then rounded to the nearest half, except for 5.5, which we don't give. So a 5.4 becomes a 5, and a 5.5 becomes a 6. The exam is December 15. I think you said it was from 2:30 until 5. And the re-exam is January 19, which is already quite soon after the in January, of course. And I will, of course, make sure that the re-exam will be graded before the end of the semester. So the re-exam is January 19th, and I will again assess the exam before, well, I don't know what January 19 is, but probably 3 days later, the exam will be graded as well. So you have your final grade before the end of the semester, of course. The grades will be in December 18, most likely very, very late in the evening. And the exam review, I will do the exam review the 21st of December, so that Monday. And how the exam review will work is that I know that I will plan individual 15-minute sessions with everyone who wants to review the exam. So everyone who wants to review the exam gets 15 minutes to review, in which we together go through the exam via Zoom. Possibly, if many people failed the exam, and if they failed the exam because of a couple of key questions, I will record a video beforehand, which I then will post on Canvas with an explanation of those questions. I will do an exam review on December 21st, that Monday. If that is not enough, then I will plan another one at the end of the first week of January. So which is probably January 6th or 7th or so, I think. Let me check. I'll let you know, but it will probably January 7th or so. The reason for that is that I really want to have a couple of days off, starting December 22nd. So that's how we'll do the exam review. So the exams will not be publicly available on Canvas because then they will end up on Stuvia, and I don't really want that because it takes like 3 or 4 days to make an exam. Any other questions? In the meantime, there are several types of questions in the exam. So we have knowledge and reproduction questions, which are simply things like mention, name, things you have to remember. There are insight questions. These ones. Insight questions in which you ask to, never mind, to explain in your own words. For example, and there are application and analysis questions in which, for example, I give you a case and I ask you to apply a theory to a case, or in which I ask you to explain or to relate to theories to each other. So, for example, what type of innovation would fit a certain type of culture. So those are analysis and application questions. And in general, the knowledge and reproduction is mostly in the multiple choice questions, although the multiple choice questions do contain a fair number of application and analysis questions. So for example, a mini case or a very short description of an organization, and then asking you for a correct answer. And sometimes there are even fairly simple knowledge questions or insight questions in the open question. So describe in your own words the difference between data and information. So it's really kind of a knowledge question. So in the exam, I always underline and make bold the important words. So I always make bold and underline words like describe, explain, analyze, so you know what to do. Yeah, if you explain an answer well enough and it makes sense, so you will probably get a few credits for that answer, except if it's a completely different answer. So that's what so many times in the exam review, people get no points for an exam because they don't remember the theory at all, and then they give a completely different answer, and then they say, yeah, but the answer I gave is also a good answer. And then I say, yeah, but it's not the answer to your question. You can write a story about your baby bunny you had as a child, which will probably be a very correct and cool story, but it's not related to the question at all. So it should still be related to the question, period. There is no word count for open questions, but be as concise as possible. Okay, insight questions are generally questions are questions which start with no bunny stories. Maybe for a few bonus credits. No. So those insight questions usually start with things like explain, in which you have to explain something in your own words. So, for example, if I asked to explain the difference between architectural and revolutionary innovation, and give an original example of both types of innovation. That would be an insight question. And finally, most of the open questions so we have 4 open questions, and in all of these questions, a significant part is devoted to application and analysis. So apply the theory to a mini case. So for example, here, there's really a typical question of an application and analysis question. Yeah, good point. So for example, here, I will answer it in a moment. Alex has a side hustle and gives training in time management. However, recently a new technology has been introduced that automatically teaches people to manage their time. As a result of the popularity of the system, Alex had to train himself in the use of the software and now gives advice on how to best use the software. So A, would this change in strategy be described best as a business alignment or business impact strategy? Explain your answer. What would be the main cost stream for Alex and what would be the main revenue stream for Alex? Explain your answer. So this is really an analysis and application question. So you read a case, you have to analyze the case and answer which one is the correct or the most correct answer, alignment or impact, and then you have to think creatively about the main cost and main revenue stream. So what will be the costs? How will I make money? So this is really an example of an analysis and application question. You can expect these in the open questions. Here, you're absolutely right. I would not ask give an original example. I would ask give an example that has not been discussed in the lectures. So original is really subjective and open to multiple types of interpretation. So yeah, I think that's it. If there are any other questions about the exam, no, there is will not be a practice exam available. Nope. I actually never have a practice exam, and my success rates for the exam are probably even a bit higher than other courses. So we have the example questions here, and then based on the slides you learn, you can prepare very well for the exam. And don't worry too much about the exam; it's really doable. What is you think of an innovation has been discussed during lectures, but it's yeah, that's why there's not a question in the exam of give an original example. You just get more credits when you give an original example. Most of the time what happens when I ask questions like give an example of is that people stick to the examples given in the lectures, which is, and then when I assess that, I cannot know if you generally understand the topic or if you just remembered it by heart and give the example because it was discussed in a lecture. So that's why it's always better to give an original example. But it's not that you get no points for it. Yeah, like we did in the chats and examples in the so many times in the lectures I have said, well, this could be an exam question. So in the exam I can ask, for example, for this. So there are a lot of examples in the lecture about that. And also you can come up with exam questions yourself. If for example, we've discussed the matrix typology of innovation a couple of times in the lectures. So of course you can expect a question like, okay, this is a type of product. What type of innovation, or this is an example of an innovation. What type of innovation is it? We discussed the typology of organizational culture. We can ask a similar question about that. If you study the slides about the advantage and disadvantage of an ERP system, I can give an example of a system in an organization and then ask you, okay, what would be the disadvantages be? How would you convince people to use a system? So explain the implementation strategy. So those are kind of logical questions that you can expect in the exam. So if there are more questions, post them. Finally, I want to, first of all, thank you very much for the lectures. No, I do that last. No, first of all, there will be you will receive a link with the evaluation for this course. So please fill in the evaluation for this course. Like I said, I completely redesigned the course this year. That was the first time I teach that in this fashion. So I would really like to have feedback, but I would also really like to have feedback which I can do something about. So many times people give feedback and they say, "Well, this was rubbish" or whatever, and probably a lot of it is rubbish, but it would really help you what you would like to have improved. The best comment on the evaluation I got ever was in all caps. Someone that said, "Remove Alex!" Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. But it would be better if you could be more specific. So please fill in the evaluation. That will really help me improve the course. And finally, I want to thank you very much for this course. And it's really a pity that we couldn't see each other in real life, and I hope that will change soon if you start your master and you're in other courses. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the questions in the chat. It's really way more interactive than in face-to-face lectures, so thank you. Thanks for your participation, and I hope you will all pass the exam. And I hope to see you in other courses as well. So thank you very much. And next year I will try to be a bit more chaotic and stick to the time. So thanks, and see you again in other courses. Bye.